A large dog, broken and abandoned, is just one step away from being put down. Weeks of rejection have left him with no hope, until tonight, when an unexpected person arrives and everything changes. You won't believe what happens next. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. The shelter was eerily quiet at night, except for the occasional whimpers and soft howls of dogs longing for freedom. In the far corner, away from the main entrance, a German shepherd named Rocky lay in his cold metal cage. His large frame was curled tightly into the corner, his once proud posture now hunched and defeated. The scars on his coat told stories of a painful past, one that no one at the shelter truly knew, and perhaps no one cared to ask about. Rocky had stopped barking weeks ago. He had learned that barking didn't matter. It didn't bring anyone to his cage. It didn't get him adopted. The visitors who came to the shelter always walked past him, their eyes lingering only briefly before they moved on to the younger, more energetic dogs. Rocky wasn't the kind of dog people wanted. A large, intimidating shepherd with a history of aggression, or so his record said. The truth was, Rocky wasn't aggressive. He was scared. Every raised hand reminded him of pain. Every loud noise sent shivers through his body. But no one saw that. To them, he was just another unadoptable dog. And now his time was almost up. That evening, as the staff cleaned up for the night, Rocky watched them quietly from his cage. His eyes, once bright and alert, had grown dull. He no longer hoped for a miracle. His heart had grown heavy with the weight of waiting. Tomorrow was the day his life would end. The shelter had made the decision. There wasn't enough space and Rocky was deemed unfit for adoption. As the lights dimmed and the staff left for the night, the silence grew deeper. The other dogs continued to whine and bark, but Rocky didn't join them. Instead, he let out a quiet whimper, a sound so soft it was almost imperceptible. It wasn't a cry for attention, it was a cry of resignation. But somewhere in the darkness, someone heard it. Across town, Ava Taylor sat in her small apartment, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. She was a vet tech by trade, someone who had dedicated her life to helping animals. But lately she had felt lost. She had always wanted to adopt a dog, but life had a way of making excuses for her. Her apartment was too small. Her hours were too long. She didn't have enough experience with challenging dogs. But that night, something pulled at her, a feeling she couldn't shake. She opened her social media feed, and there it was. A post from the local shelter. It was a grainy photo of Rocky Boy lying in his cage, his eyes staring blankly at the camera. The caption read, "Rocky, 5 years old, needs a home by tomorrow, or he will be euthanized." Ava Taylor's heart sank. There was something in his eyes, something that called out to her. She couldn't explain it, but she felt an undeniable pull. She stared at the photo for a long moment, her finger hovering over the phone. "You can't save them all," she whispered to herself, a phrase she'd heard too many times in her line of work. But this time the words felt hollow. Without thinking, she dialed the shelter's number. It was late, and no one answered, but she left a message anyway. "Hi, my name is Ava Taylor. I saw your post about Rocky. I know it's late, but I want to help. Please don't do anything until I come by tomorrow." Hanging up the phone, Ava Taylor felt a rush of emotions. Fear, doubt, and a strange sense of determination. She didn't know why she felt so compelled to help this particular dog, but she couldn't ignore the feeling. She set her alarm for early morning, knowing that she had to be at the shelter as soon as it opened. Back at the shelter, Rocky lay still in his cage, unaware that someone, somewhere, had decided to fight for him. The moonlight streamed through the small, barred window, casting a faint glow over his tired body. For the first time in weeks, Rocky let out a deep sigh, as if some part of him knew that his story wasn't over yet. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. At the shelter, the staff were already beginning their routine, feeding the dogs and cleaning their cages. For Rocky, it was just another day in a string of monotonous, lonely days. But today, something was different. Today was the day his fate would be decided. Rocky sat quietly in his cage as the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. The shelter manager, a stern woman named Sophie, approached his enclosure with a clipboard in hand. Her expression was one of regret, but her eyes were firm. "I'm sorry, boy," she murmured. "We tried, but no one's come for you." She moved on, but Rocky didn't react. He had already accepted what was coming. His once bright spirit had dimmed, buried beneath layers of disappointment and fear. Meanwhile, Ava Taylor was already on her way. Her heart pounded as she navigated the quiet streets, her mind racing with doubts. "What if he's too aggressive? What if I can't handle him?" she whispered to herself. But every time she considered turning back, the image of Rocky's eyes from the shelter's post flashed in her mind. There was something about him, something she couldn't ignore. Pulling into the shelter's parking lot, Ava Taylor took a deep breath. The building was unassuming, a simple brick structure surrounded by chain-link fences. She hurried to the entrance, clutching her phone with the shelter's post still open on the screen. Inside, Sophie was reviewing Rocky's file one last time when she heard the door open. She looked up, surprised to see a young woman standing in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "Hi, I'm Ava Taylor," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I called last night about Rocky." Sophie raised an eyebrow, glancing at the clock. "You're here early," she said, "but you're too late. He's scheduled." "Wait," Ava Taylor interrupted, her voice firm. "I'll take him." Sophie paused, studying Ava Taylor's determined expression. "Are you sure? Rocky isn't an easy dog. He's had a rough past, and we've had issues with aggression." "I'm sure," Ava Taylor replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I know what I'm doing. Please, just give me a chance." Sophie hesitated, but there was something about Ava Taylor's tone that made her reconsider. With a nod, she set down the clipboard. "All right, let me take you to him." Ava Taylor followed Sophie down the corridor, the sound of barking and whining growing louder with each step. The air was heavy with the smell of disinfectant and damp fur. As they approached Rocky's cage, Ava Taylor's heart sank. He was even more defeated in person than he had seemed in the photo. His body was curled tightly in the corner of the cage, his head resting on his paws, and his dull eyes barely acknowledged her presence. Sophie opened the cage cautiously, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "Be careful," she warned. "He's not exactly welcoming." Ava Taylor crouched down, her voice soft. "Hey, Rocky," she said gently. "It's okay, boy. I'm here to take you home." At the sound of her voice, Rocky lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching. He didn't move, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. A spark of curiosity, perhaps. Ava Taylor extended her hand, careful not to invade his space. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." Rocky hesitated, his body tense. But after a long moment, he shifted slightly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Ava Taylor held her breath, her hand still outstretched. Slowly, cautiously, Rocky moved toward her, his movements tentative and unsure. When his nose finally brushed her hand, Ava Taylor felt a surge of relief. "Good boy," she said softly, her voice breaking with emotion. "Good boy." Sophie watched in silence, her usual skepticism melting into a faint smile. "You've got a lot of work ahead of you," she said, her tone lighter now. "But maybe, just maybe, this will work." As Ava Taylor led Rocky out of the shelter, the morning sun bathed them in a warm glow. Rocky's steps were hesitant, his body stiff, but he followed her willingly. For the first time in months, he was leaving the confines of the shelter. For the first time in months, he had hope. The drive back to Ava Taylor's small apartment was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle from the back seat. Rocky lay curled on a blanket she had placed for him, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings through the window. His body was still tense, his movements cautious, as though he couldn't quite trust what was happening. For all he knew, this could be another temporary stop, another fleeting moment before being returned to the cold, metal confines of a cage. Ava Taylor kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror, her heart aching at the sight. She wanted to say something, to reassure him, but she knew words wouldn't be enough. This was a dog who had learned not to hope, not to trust. It would take more than kind words to break through the walls he had built around himself. When they arrived, Ava Taylor parked in front of her apartment complex, a modest building with a small patch of grass in the front. She turned to Rocky and spoke softly. "We're here, boy. This is home now." She opened the car door carefully, giving Rocky a moment to adjust before extending the leash. He hesitated, his ears twitching, but eventually stepped out. His paws touched the ground as he sniffed the air, his posture still guarded. Ava Taylor led him toward the building, moving slowly so as not to startle him. Inside, the apartment was simple but cozy. A dog bed sat in the corner near the living room window, and a set of bowls with fresh water and kibble awaited Rocky in the kitchen. Ava Taylor had spent the night before preparing the space, wanting to make it as welcoming as possible. But as she unclipped the leash and let Rocky explore, it became clear that he wasn't ready to settle in just yet. He patted around the apartment, his nose working overtime as he inspected every corner. His movements were stiff, his body low to the ground as though expecting danger to leap out at any moment. When he reached the dog bed, he sniffed it briefly before retreating to a corner near the door, curling into a tight ball. His eyes remained fixed on Ava Taylor, watching her every move with wary curiosity. Ava Taylor sighed, her chest tightening. She had expected this. She knew it would take time, but seeing Rocky so withdrawn was harder than she'd anticipated. She had crouched down, keeping her voice soft. "It's okay, Rocky. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." For a moment, his eyes softened, but he didn't move. Ava Taylor decided to give him space, retreating to the kitchen to prepare dinner. She hoped the smell of food might coax him out of his shell. But when she returned with a plate for herself, Rocky was still in the same spot, his head resting on his paws. Over the next few days, a delicate routine began to form. Ava Taylor gave Rocky as much space as he needed, never forcing him to interact, but always letting him know she was there. She spent hours sitting quietly on the floor near his corner, reading a book or working on her laptop, allowing him to grow accustomed to her presence. Slowly, he began to relax, his posture less tense, his eyes less guarded. One evening, as Ava Taylor sat on the couch watching TV, she felt a faint pressure against her leg. She looked down and froze, her heart skipping a beat. Rocky had approached her, his nose gently nudging her knee. For a moment, she didn't move, afraid of scaring him away. But then she reached out slowly, her hand hovering above his head before resting gently on his fur. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Rocky didn't pull away. He stood there for a few moments before retreating to his corner, but the connection had been made. It was a small step, but to Ava Taylor, it felt monumental. That night, as Ava Taylor lay in bed, she thought about everything Rocky had endured. The scars on his body, the fear in his eyes. They all told a story of pain and survival, but beneath it all, she saw a glimmer of hope, a spark that hadn't been extinguished. She was determined to fan that spark into a flame. As she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but feel that Rocky's journey was just beginning, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The days stretched into weeks, and slowly but surely, Rocky began to change. At first, it was subtle, a soft wag of his tail when Ava Taylor called his name, or the way he followed her from room to room, maintaining a cautious distance but always keeping her in sight. Each small step felt monumental, a tiny crack in the wall he had built around himself. Ava Taylor, true to her promise, remained patient. She never forced him to interact, but she celebrated every moment of progress. When he finally lay on the dog bed she had set up for him, she nearly cried. It wasn't much, but it was proof that he was starting to trust her, starting to believe that maybe this new life wasn't so bad after all. One evening, after a long day at work, Ava Taylor decided it was time to try something new. She grabbed a leash and knelt down in front of Rocky, holding it out for him to see. "What do you think, buddy? Want to go for a walk?" Rocky tilted his head, his ears perking slightly. It was the most curious expression Ava Taylor had seen from him yet. Encouraged, she clipped the leash onto his collar and opened the front door. Rocky hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting to her as if seeking reassurance. She gave him a gentle pat. "It's okay. Let's go." As they stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapped around them. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets lined with trees whose leaves rustled softly in the breeze. Rocky moved cautiously at first, his body low and his steps tentative. But as they walked, he began to relax. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, taking in the new scents around him. For Ava Taylor, it was a bittersweet moment. She couldn't help but wonder how long it had been since Rocky had last enjoyed something as simple as a walk. How many years had he spent confined to a cage, deprived of the freedom every dog deserves? As they turned a corner, a neighbor approached. a middle-aged man walking a cheerful golden retriever. Ava Taylor tensed, unsure of how Rocky would react. She stopped, holding the leash firmly but gently. "It's okay, Rocky," she murmured, her voice calm. The golden retriever wagged his tail enthusiastically, its owner giving Ava Taylor a friendly smile. "New dog?" he asked. Ava Taylor nodded. "This is Rocky. I adopted him a few weeks ago." The man crouched slightly, keeping his distance but offering a hand for Rocky to sniff. Rocky froze, his body stiffening, and Ava Taylor felt the tension ripple through the leash. For a moment, she thought he might lunge, but instead, he simply stepped back, his eyes wary but not hostile. "Good boy," she said softly, relieved. The neighbor straightened and gave her an understanding nod. "You're doing great. It takes time, but they always come around." Ava Taylor smiled, grateful for the encouragement. As they continued their walk, Rocky seemed to grow more confident. His steps became steadier, his ears more relaxed. By the time they returned home, he was walking beside her, his head held just a little higher than before. That night, as Ava Taylor settled onto the couch with a cup of tea, Rocky surprised her again. He walked over to her, his tail wagging ever so slightly, and rested his head on her lap. Ava Taylor froze, her breath catching in her throat. She set the cup aside and gently ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the warmth of his trust for the first time. "You're a good boy, Rocky," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be okay." For the first time since she had brought him home, Rocky seemed at peace. His eyes closed, and a soft sigh escaped him as he settled into her lap. In that moment, Ava Taylor knew that the walls around his heart were finally coming down. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, a shadow from Rocky's past loomed on the horizon. One night, as Ava Taylor was tidying up the apartment, she noticed something strange. A car she didn't recognize was parked across the street, its headlights off. It had been there for hours, unmoving. Charlie, who had been dozing near the window, suddenly stood, his ears alert. He let out a low, rumbling growl, the sound vibrating through the room. Ava Taylor's heart sank as she realized that, for all their progress, Rocky might not be as free from his past as she had hoped. The mysterious car stayed parked across the street for hours, its dark silhouette barely visible under the dim glow of a streetlight. Ava Taylor tried to convince herself that it was nothing, that it belonged to a neighbor or someone visiting, but the growing unease in her chest wouldn't subside. Charlie, however, seemed to know better. His low growl continued, his body tense as he stood by the window, staring intently at the car. "Rocky," Ava Taylor whispered. Crouching beside him, she gently stroked his fur, hoping to calm him. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe here." But Rocky didn't relax. His growl deepened, and his eyes remained locked on the car. Ava Taylor had seen him react to strange noises or sudden movements before, but this was different. This was something deeper, something primal. She glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. Whatever was happening, she needed answers. Gathering her courage, Ava Taylor stepped outside. The cool night air sent a shiver down her spine as she approached the edge of her driveway. The car was still there, its windows tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. "Can I help you?" she called, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. For a moment, there was no response. Then the car engine roared to life, its headlights flashing on, and it sped away into the night. Ava Taylor stood frozen, her heart pounding as she watched the car disappear down the street. She turned back toward the house, where Rocky was now standing at the window, his eyes still fixed on the street. The next morning, Ava Taylor couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She called the shelter to see if they had any information about Rocky's past, but the response was vague. "We don't have much on him," the manager said apologetically. "He was found as a stray, but we did hear rumors about a difficult history." "What kind of history?" Ava Taylor pressed. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We heard he might have come from a dogfighting operation, but nothing was confirmed." Ava Taylor's stomach dropped. Dogfighting. The thought of Rocky being forced into such a cruel life made her heart ache. It explained so much: his fear, his scars, his distrust of people. But it also meant that whoever had been involved in that operation might still be out there, and if they had found her, it wasn't a coincidence. That evening, Ava Taylor decided to take extra precautions. She locked every door and window, double-checking them before settling onto the couch. Rocky stayed close to her, his usual caution replaced by a heightened alertness. He seemed to sense her unease, and his presence gave her a small sense of comfort. But as the hours ticked by, the sense of dread only grew stronger. Around midnight, Rocky's ears perked up, and he let out another low growl. Ava Taylor's heart raced as she followed his gaze to the front window. The car was back. This time, Ava Taylor didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone and called the police, explaining the situation in a hushed tone. "There's a car outside my house," she said. "It's been watching us for hours. Please send someone." The operator assured her that an officer was on the way, but the minutes felt like hours as Ava Taylor and Rocky waited. Rocky stood by the door, his body rigid, ready to protect her if necessary. When the police finally arrived, the car was gone again, leaving only tire marks on the pavement as evidence. The officer took her statement, but there wasn't much they could do without more information. "If it comes back, call us immediately," he said, his tone firm. "We'll keep an eye on the area." As the officer left, Ava Taylor sat on the floor next to Rocky, her hands trembling as she stroked his fur. "What have you been through, Rocky?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "What are you running from?" Rocky leaned into her touch, his body relaxing slightly for the first time that night. It was as if he understood her pain, as if he wanted to reassure her that they would get through this together. But deep down, Ava Taylor knew that the danger wasn't over. Whoever was in that car wasn't just watching. They were waiting, and she would do whatever it took to protect Rocky from whatever shadows were trying to drag him back into his past. The following day dawned gray and somber, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Ava Taylor sat by the window, sipping her coffee and watching Rocky as he rested near her feet. His head was on his paws, his eyes half closed, but his ears twitched at every sound. He was calm but not relaxed. The events of the previous night had left a lingering tension in both of them. Ava Taylor's phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. It was the shelter manager. "Hi, Ava Taylor," Sophie said, her tone cautious. "I thought I should let you know. We had a call this morning. Someone was asking about Rocky." Ava Taylor's stomach turned. What did they say? They didn't give a name, but they were insistent, asking if we knew where he was. I didn't tell them anything, of course, but... Sophie's voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. "Thank you for letting me know," Ava Taylor said, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her. She hung up and looked at Rocky, who was now staring at her intently as if sensing her unease. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you." That evening, the storm finally broke. Thunder rumbled in the distance as rain lashed against the windows. Ava Taylor locked every door and window, her heart pounding with every bolt of lightning that lit up the sky. Rocky stayed close to her, his presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. Around midnight, the sound of a car engine cut through the storm. Ava Taylor's pulse quickened as she peered through the curtains. The same car was parked across the street, its headlights off, barely visible in the rain. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, dialing the police. "This is Ava Taylor Carter," she said quickly. "The car is back, the one I reported last night. Please send someone." The operator assured her that officers were on their way, but Ava Taylor knew it might take time. Too much time. She turned to Rocky, who was now standing by the door, his body rigid, his ears perked. His low growl filled the room, a warning to whatever threat was approaching. Minutes felt like hours as Ava Taylor waited. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone was outside. Rocky barked sharply, his voice echoing through the small apartment. Ava Taylor grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the door, her hands trembling. "Stay here," she whispered to Rocky, but he wouldn't budge. He stood by her side, his eyes locked on the door. The doorknob rattled. Ava Taylor's heart raced as she flipped the flashlight on and shone it through the peephole. The figure on the other side was obscured by the rain, but she could make out the outline of a man. A man who was now trying to force his way inside. Before she could react, Rocky lunged at the door, barking ferociously. The man on the other side hesitated, startled by the sheer force of the dog's growls. Ava Taylor took the moment to shout, "The police are on their way! Leave now!" the man cursed under his breath. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he retreated. Ava Taylor watched through the window as he sprinted back to the car, which roared to life and sped off into the night. When the police arrived, Ava Taylor recounted everything, her hands still shaking. They promised to increase patrols in the area and took down all the details. But Ava Taylor knew this wasn't over. Whoever was after Rocky wasn't going to give up so easily. As the officers left, Ava Taylor sat on the floor, her back against the door. Rocky came to her, his large body pressing against hers, as if to comfort her. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. "You're safe now," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "We'll get through this, together." The next day, Ava Taylor made a decision. She packed a bag, loaded Rocky into the car, and drove to a friend's property in the countryside. It was a quiet, secluded place where Rocky could finally be free from the shadows of his past. As they pulled up to the small farmhouse, Ava Taylor felt a sense of relief wash over her. This was a fresh start, not just for Rocky, but for both of them. For the first time since she had brought him home, Rocky stepped out of the car with his tail wagging. He sniffed the air, his body relaxed, his eyes brighter than she had ever seen. Ava Taylor smiled through her tears, knowing that they had both found something they had been searching for. Peace. Rocky turned to her and gave a small, happy bark, as if to say, "Thank you." Ava Taylor knelt down and hugged him tightly. "You're my family now," she whispered, "and no one will ever hurt you again." Rocky's journey from a shelter cage to a life filled with love and freedom was nothing short of extraordinary. His scars, both physical and emotional, told a story of pain and survival, but also of resilience and hope. Ava Taylor's determination to protect him and give him the life he deserved proved that every animal, no matter how broken, can heal when given love and care. Rocky wasn't just a rescue dog, he was a symbol of second chances, a testament to the power of compassion. Together, he and Ava Taylor overcame the shadows of his past, proving that no matter how dark the beginning, there's always hope for a brighter tomorrow. The story of Rocky and Ava Taylor is not just about love and perseverance. It is a testament to the power of compassion and second chances. Rocky, a dog who seemed to have no hope left, found a home, a family, and a new life where there was no more pain or fear. Together with Ava Taylor, he overcame the challenges of his past, taking small but steady steps toward a brighter future. We often see dogs abandoned, hurt by the very people they trust the most. But this story reminds us that no matter how painful it is, love and true care can heal all wounds. Every dog, every animal deserves the chance to be loved and cared for. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel to continue following amazing stories of rescue and life-changing transformations. We believe that each small act you take can bring about a big change for a living being. Share this video with your friends and family so we can spread hope and love to animals who need help. Thank you for watching and supporting us.